Hey everyone, my name is Josh Kunz. I'm a customer experience consultant at UserTesting. And today we get to talk with Katie Harkins, one of our sales directors, just about startups. So Katie, how about a quick intro from you?
Yeah, happy Friday. We made it. So I've been with UserTesting for 2+ years now, and I'm their director of sales. And I've been loving the ride, and I've learned a ton. But we're helping all the coolest startups of the world roll out great experiences.
Yeah, and so this conversation kind of started, we were both in a meeting and you had just an offhand comment about what you were seeing in the startup world. And so I took that and was like, I want to know more about that. So thank you for spending some time chatting with me on a Friday. And this conversation is just to kind of see what's going on in the world of startups, what has changed since COVID, what are some tips and tricks that other startups may use. And yeah, so let's just kind of dive in. So in your experience, when you're working with the typical startup, what do they look like? Who are you working with? What type of companies are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all over the map. It's every location, like ton of different languages, mobile, desktop, B2B, B2C, like kind of all sizes of a scrappy team from like 3 people up to a public company with like 220 employees, all the way down to a startup that are, they're doing concept testing with us and don't have a working URL. Pretty much talk to everybody.
And within these teams, do they have like a mature research practice, or are they, like you said, that scrappy 3-person team and that's it? Like, kind of who are you seeing in that space too?
Yeah, I mean, there's some similarities with the conversations that we're at least having or what they're looking to test with user testing. They're pretty much turning to us to get answers, though. Kind of like plain and simple. They need to rank product features based on what will make an impact with their user base, or they need to marry their quant and qual to prove out to like executive stakeholders that this should not be going to deployment, or maybe something will or will not resonate with their user base, or they won't pay for it. One of our customers called user testing like the squash tool, because they were trying to prove out ideas internally of like what would or would not work. We had a head of design actually tell us that she would lock her CEO in a room, and this is BC, like before COVID, and hit play on the end output of user testing, which is the voice of the customer, so that he would understand what her and her team were working on and the impact it was having on the growth trajectory of the startup. We talked to a lot of different folks. It's just, when I think about it, it's just way more impactful to hit play on an interview with a current customer or a prospective customer and give them a seat at the table than to point out like a PowerPoint deck over Zoom nowadays. I just think in 2021, we're way better than that, especially when we're still on lockdown. But like the last 10 months, everything that a company had planned to accomplish and launch in 2020 kind of had to change. It seems like a decade ago, but everything this year might have been meticulously planned out, and you either had to adapt or die.
Yeah, so that's also a really interesting idea or just conversation. Is you've been at user testing for 2 years, so you had a lot of experience with startups prior to COVID, and now that COVID's hit, like I feel like their world has had to shift almost much more rapidly than anybody else. Can you kind of talk about how startups are arriving at user testing, and kind of what are they hoping to get out of user testing in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess user testing is essentially like almost like an insurance policy for these startups, just making sure that they get it right the first time. So there's like all the stats where like 80% of startups at launch fail, and a big part of why is because they're not validating their hypothesis prior to launch. So you can't like send out like a spray and pray approach and make sure it lands. Like that's not going to work, opposed to like making sure you're avoiding rework cost and more time that will outweigh the cost of user testing subscription. Like that just makes sense. But ultimately, they're looking to get customer feedback throughout the design process or prospective customer feedback from fresh eyes, like fresh eyeballs throughout the product lifecycle. Because you can only put something in front of your friends and family so many times. Right? That's just not, that type of testing doesn't scale. But ultimately, they just want to be proactive in the process with their users before approving for deployment. Like no one likes rework, right? No one wants to lose faith in their developers, or like that's not you don't want that to happen. No one likes user churn. No one likes click rage. Like, it's like, I'm trying to give you money, and you want to make sure that that works. So they're incorporating user testing early and often by understanding why something's happening.
Yeah, and so you were kind of telling me the other day just about one of the startups that you worked with that had just like a major pivot within their process. Is that pretty common? You see somebody, have this major pivot based on the user feedback that they're getting?
Oh yeah, all the time. Especially with COVID. Like they have to pivot.
And how does the user feedback kind of play into that? How does that work for companies?
I guess a good example is we were working with a company in the fitness industry, and BC, before COVID, they were doing group fitness and on-site training, and then COVID hit. In the last 10 months, they had to transition their entire company to remote on-demand training sessions and classes on a mobile app. So you can imagine the drastic change that they had to do internally to make that actually happen, let alone monetize the beast. So they were ironing out their ideas pre-launch with user testing, reaffirming kind of their thoughts and ideas. They were testing prototypes with us. They were doing contextual interviews. They wanted to observe people in their natural settings. So they used us to generate ideas for that opportunity. Like when I work out and like roll out my yoga mat, if I'm firing up a mobile app, it'd probably be beneficial to know which types of weights or like exercise bands that I should bring with me. So they're testing all kinds of fun stuff.
And so it kind of sounds like with these startups is they need to be getting feedback throughout the process, and no matter if they're pivoting to a new business model or they're changing their product completely, like customer feedback still is a part of how they're actually working on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely. So does the skill set have to change? Do you have to have, I imagine like the tests have to be different, or the audience has to be different. How does the person on the other end trying to get that knowledge, how difficult it is for them to relearn or pivot or change?
I just think of like Ross from Friends, where it's like pivot. I don't know if you know that one. I don't think it's that challenging because startups are used to adapting and changing really rapidly. It's just kind of normal with them. They've always embraced a culture of sharing and collaborating early on. And so I just don't think it's that much different than what they've done in the past. It's just that they already know that they have to get it early. Otherwise, they'll fail.
Interesting. Any patterns or trends that you're seeing just in terms of the industries or the verticals that we're working with? Is this more effective with a particular type of startup, or are you just kind of seeing across the board that this is kind of the new normal for folks?
I think what really makes me livid is, why does it take a global pandemic for folks to invest in ed tech? Like, why? Right? Like, why now? They should have been doing this all the time. But as far as trends, I mean, it makes sense with fitness, right? Because I can't go to Equinox anymore, or telehealth, fintech, even mental health. I just know when it starts raining in San Francisco, I'm going to be really sad. I can't go outside. And I was talking to a friend last night, and I was telling him the only thing that I used to look forward to was traveling and seeing friends from college, and I don't have that outlet anymore. So I have to find something new. But frankly, we're industry agnostic. We talk to everybody. And I guess, Josh, like customer feedback and your perspective customers' feedback is important regardless of industry.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So people that are just starting, maybe startups that haven't done this in the past, and they're just trying to start into this and start getting customer feedback. What are some of the common pain points that they run into that may not, immediately be obvious about that process?
I guess finding the people in the first place, right? Like the folks that they need to talk to. If it's a hard to find audience, they need to still talk to them, right? Like that's pretty much plain and simple what they need to do. So that would be like the top pain point, I would say. If it's not like a Gen Pop panel, then they need us to chit chat with them. Like we were working with an ovulation app, and they were trying to find folks that were pregnant within the panel, and then track their reactions to what they were actually building. So that 9 months to them was super important to get it right.
Oh, interesting. And did they track with that same participant through the whole 9 months, or how did that work?
They were actually testing with new folks globally. So like ovulation predictions, health insights, post-pregnancy developments. They were getting weird and funky with it, but they wanted to make sure that they were rolling it out right the first time.
Interesting. And in terms of just, you had mentioned one of the most interesting use cases that you had seen, and what are some of the really interesting stories in the customers that you're working with? What would one of those highlights be? What would, if you can kind of go through your memory bank and share a really interesting use case?
We're actually currently working with a CTO of a pet company that created this smart collar with GPS functionality, so you could like track your puppy if he gets lost on a hike. But it was also full of motion sensors to detect like itching and limping before it becomes an issue with the fur baby. So I thought that was really interesting, and they wanted to measure the puppy's water intake as well. So they were able to find pet owners really easily, and even test with folks who have a high income that can afford the collar in the first place. That one was really cool. And then we're working with a construction company right now, but it's two guys working on a push to talk like walkie-talkie functionality, and they're testing everything: first impressions on iOS, pricing page, like early reservations when they got out of beta. Did you ever play games? Are you a gamer, Josh? I don't even know.
Oh yeah.
Really? Okay, so my extent was Super Nintendo. Like my brother had the original one, and then I played Counter-Strike in high school, and that was about it. But we're working with really cool gaming companies that want to test their game functionality within Alexa. I'm going to say her name, and then she's going to go off. So that entire customer journey, they want to test with us, from downloading to the app, and then like turning it on within the Alexa app device, and then walking into their kitchen and chit-chatting with Alexa and going through the actual game. That's a fun one.
Wow. And they're able to just continuously test through that entire process?
The whole enchilada with us, because we can fire up the camera and test actually in their home.
Oh, wow. And it's how many people are kind of involved with that team? Because that seems like a lot of extra work and a lot of time intensive work.
It's all self-serve within the platform. Yeah, so they can fire up a test. You can dream it. You can test it.
Awesome. One of the other things that you had commented on was just you had that story about the CEO kind of getting trapped in a room pre-COVID. How has the videos and just the customer feedback kind of changed how startups are sharing their story within their companies?
Yeah. Again, what's the Stephen Hawking quote? What does he always say? Intelligence is ability to adapt. his ability to adapt to change, right? So I think with startups, they were always used to sharing really quickly on whatever they were working on. And so Slack functionality or Jira functionality that's built in enables them to do this, because not every meeting should be, blocked in a calendar over Zoom. Like, they can collaborate really effectively and easily with sharing the voice of the customer, especially when they're all distributed and remote now.
And so just being able to share videos a lot quicker, faster.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get feedback at the speed of business today. Like, you shouldn't have to wait weeks to get feedback on a prototype or from your current customer base. That's not advantageous to the organization, and it affects the bottom line.
Interesting. Any other thoughts, patterns, trends you're kind of seeing in startups?
Yeah. What I love about them too is that they're scrappy. And so they don't waste money A/B testing their AdWords live, because capital is important to them. So they test with user testing to make sure the copy or the banner or the creative or the AdWords themselves that they're bidding on actually convert. Right? They're not asking themselves, will this convert? They already did that testing, and then they're reaping the benefits of it post-launch. I used to work in a shared office space across the street from the Salt House in San Francisco on Mission Street. And there was this really cool startup called 2B TV. And this year during COVID, they got acquired by Fox for $440 million. And it's just because they're building great products and they're disrupting the big boys by testing early and often.
Wow.
It's cool. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they were testing like OTT functionality. So the navigation, or how people were, firing up their clicker and actually turning on their TV and finding their app for the first time. I was really proud of those guys.
Awesome. Well, I did want to give our audience a few minutes to kind of ask any follow-up questions, or any questions about the startup space that we may want to dive into that we didn't kind of chat about in this topic. Let me quickly go through the comments to see if there's anything in here that we can follow up on. And if you do have a question for Katie or I, you can put that in the chat. Let's see.
I love the faster we can measure, the faster we can move on.
Yeah, I think that's probably the mantra for most startups, wouldn't you say? That the faster you measure, the faster you can move on to build something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the exciting part too. Whether it be like competitive benchmarking, or, they're testing everything from user engagement to user retention to, the average revenue per paying user. The list goes on.
Okay, so we have one question. What about bigger startups like 1,000+ employees?
I'm like, are they still startups? They are. They're startups within startups. So they have to get research in the hands of their product team. It's just essential. And scaling that research helps all organizations of the business stay closer to the customer. And I think that's just essential as they grow and as they keep hiring new employees, to keep the voice of the customer close. Because frankly, it's everyone's responsibility in the company.
Have we worked with a lot of companies that, have gone from that 3-person to 100 people to 500 people and kind of been able to scale with them as they've grown?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an Australian company called Canva. I say that because when they originally started working with us 6 years ago, it was their founder that initially brought us in, and then the research was just kind of contagious in terms of helping the designers build the right thing and then get in the hands of the researchers when they eventually hired them, and then enable their product team to work quicker. And now they're sitting at thousands of employees.
Wow. Yeah, I think they're still around too. We've continued to have a great partnership with them.
Oh yeah, they're awesome.
Another question: how do you keep the startup spirit in large corporations? What principles should we use when scaling?
Ooh, good one. That spirit, I hope, never dies, regardless of company size. And I think you can look to the Amazons of the world of how, in terms of like how they keep the spirit alive. I think it's sharing stories and best practices and customer wins, whether it be over Slack or in an email or an all hands meeting, or even starting a team meeting with a video. I think that keeps the developers or the product team like aligned on what they're building and the impact it's going to have. So I think that's a good way to like keep it lively in terms of spirit. Principles used when scaling. Get it in the hands to people early. They want to know these types of answers. They want to know why their quants off and dig into specific areas of like an onboarding flow that they can improve.
Yeah, I think just in terms of when I've been working with customers and watching people try to scale, I always kind of equate it with kind of sailing. Anybody can learn how to sail, but you're not going to be in America's Cup next year. So you start small. You start with those small wins. You start, just getting your foot in the door, talking to customers, and then build your skill set out from there. And it's just about making sure that everybody knows that talking to customers is the best way to get to the answer that you're looking for. So making sure that everybody has access to customers, access to the tools and resources necessary to, get closer. There's also customers that talk about exposure hours. So kind of looking at month over month, like how many hours are your employees or your teammates spending with customers? So,
ooh, I love that.
2 hours. Just kind of making that a metric that everybody's looking at, like how many customers did you talk to in the last month, without having necessarily project specific things, but just how often are you interacting with customers in some way?
I think that's applicable to all segments too, whether you're in sales or marketing or product or even engineering. I know we internally do customer empathy meetings, and so we're hearing directly from the user base on what's delighting them and how they're using user testing internally to roll out awesome experiences.
Okay, so we got one final question here. It's a little bit of a niche market. So how do you bring specific target market like high-level executives, CEOs, CTOs, CFOs? What's been your experience with recruiting those high value participants?
Or is the answer, how do you get the right feedback in front of them? Yeah, I mean, I think with C-level in particular, or even board members, we shouldn't be shy about sharing those types of wins. If you're building a product specific to C-level, it's an interesting TAM, right? But I mean, game on. Let's go try and find them. But I think sharing what you find and what you're working on and why you're working on it, or again, the bottom line that it's going to impact or the revenue splash that it's going to make, sharing that entire process with C-level is important, especially during these lockdown times, and because they want to know what you're working on and how it's going to impact them.
Awesome. Well, we're just about at time here. So I guess, my last question for you, Katie, would be if a startup is out there, they're struggling with their products, what would be the first thing that they should be doing to start getting customer feedback? What would the final thoughts be for them?
Yeah, I mean, they need to start testing. Like it's never too late to start that process. And I think people shouldn't be fearful of the feedback that they're going to get. Because yeah, you might have to make a few changes, but ultimately that's going to save you money in the long run, whether the customer retains longer or spends more money with you. So you have to test. Like it's table stakes. We're 2 weeks away from 2021. You have to do it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking a half hour out of your busy Friday. I know we're all trying to race to the holidays here, but really enjoyed talking with you, Katie. Thank you for everybody listening and your questions. Hopefully there was some good takeaways here. If you do have more questions, feel free to ping us on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to answer them. And with that, I think we're going to say goodbye and happy Friday and happy holidays, everyone.